China is under intense diplomatic pressure to pull its support from isolated Russia. But 3 weeks after the invasion of Ukraine, Beijing has shown few signs of abandoning its friends in the Kremlin. And today, US President Joe Biden is speaking to his Chinese counterpart, Xi Jinping, by phone. It's the first phone call between both leaders since the video summit back in November. The White House believes that it will serve as a chance to air their differences. Trade rows and snarled international supply chains are also one of the topics of discussion. But a big focus is the Western bid to force Russia out of Ukraine. Beijing has refused to condemn Russia and has rather blamed the United States and NATO's eastward expansion for worsening tensions, as the United States is spearheading the unprecedented pressure campaign on Russia. Now, the White House is piling pressure on China to not support Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The Biden administration has issued public and private warnings to Beijing about facing dire consequences if it provides material support to Russia's war. This is what Joe Biden had to say about the upcoming phone call.
I think we're at an inflection point in history. I think, and I mean that sincerely, it occurs every several generations. I think we're in a genuine struggle between autocracies and democracies, and whether or not democracies can be sustained. And I'm going to be speaking to President Xi tomorrow, and he'll remind me that I told him, he remembers every damn thing I've said, unfortunately. But all kidding aside, we talked about the idea, he does not believe democracies can be sustained in the 21st century. Because things move so rapidly, technology is changing so much, democracies don't have time to arrive at consensus. That's why autocracies will succeed.
Well, Biden has assembled a tight Western alliance against Russia, while also giving military support to Ukrainian forces. But Beijing has refused to condemn Moscow. As recently as last week, Beijing called the partnership between the two countries rock solid. There are also reports that Russia has reached out to China for aid as it faces sanctions from around the world. The reports have been denied by the Kremlin. But Washington fears that the Chinese could switch to provide financial and even military support for Russia. The White House is tight-lipped on whether Biden will threaten China with sanctions during his call, but some sort of response is on the table. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken confirmed that Washington will make it clear to China it will bear responsibility for any actions it takes to support Russia's aggression.
We believe China in particular has a responsibility to use its influence with President Putin and to defend the international rules and principles that it professes to support. Instead, it appears that China is moving in the opposite direction by refusing to condemn this aggression while seeking to portray itself as a neutral arbiter. And we're concerned that they're considering directly assisting Russia with military equipment to use in Ukraine. President Biden will be speaking to President Xi tomorrow and will make clear that China will bear responsibility for any actions it takes to support Russia's aggression, and we will not hesitate to impose costs.
China is the number 2 economy and the world's biggest exporter. Despite the coziness with Moscow, it also wants to play a leadership role in the world. Under growing pressure to take a side, it remains to be seen how China will balance its conflicting priorities. Well, to give us more on this story, our correspondent Susan Tarani is joining us live from New York City. Well, Susan, the Biden administration has been making it clear for some time now that there will be consequences for China if it decides to help Russia. What do you see as the likely topics during this conversation and possible outcomes from the phone call?
Yes, it seems like this administration had been planning this conversation for some time, really a conversation that Xi and Biden were scheduled to really have. That's something that really the White House wanted to drive home, but it's no secret that after that 7-hour meeting between Jake Sullivan and a top Chinese diplomat, I think it really started to gain momentum. The United United States really wants to make sure that China will not backfill sanctions imposed against Russia. On the other hand, those reports that China will somehow assist Russia militarily, it really wants some kind of assurance from China that that won't happen, and that China will definitely face sanctions if it decides to once again go and aid Russia in that sense. But the question is, first of all, does the United States have the support of its European allies to really make those kinds of requests from China? And on the other hand, whether or not China's economic interests would it would play a central part at the end of the day in having this conversation with the United States, and it would want some kind of assurances, and if President Biden does gain that kind of assurance that perhaps China would not, first of all, help Russia militarily, which it has denied, or, for example, it won't backfill sanctions, then what would the United States give in return? And some say that perhaps lifting those Trump-era tariffs might be one option.
And Susan, where you are in New York City, the UN Security Council is about to start its meeting, another one on Ukraine that's taking place today. It's a meeting that was called by Russia. What more do we know about what will likely take place over the next few hours there?
So this was a meeting called by Russia, as you mentioned, Nick, and at first they wanted to put a draft resolution forth regarding the humanitarian crisis to go into vote. However, we're hearing now that that vote isn't going to take place because in earnest it was going to face a backlash and opposition from the West, not because of the humanitarian of it, because in the draft resolution it did not acknowledge that Russia started the war, and some were saying that the reason Russia was putting this resolution forth was to sort of put the West in a corner and in a bind so that it would oppose and veto a resolution against a humanitarian resolution. You know, a lot of politics and diplomacy going on in that. However, this resolution is not going to go to a vote. I think it's going to focus on the humanitarian aspect of it and a path forward in seeing if negotiations and diplomacy can open some sort of corridor to get humanitarian aid into Ukraine, at least for a short period of time.
Thank you, Susan. That was Susan Tarani joining us live from New York City.